There's no second best. By becoming rich. Take all your money, buy Bitcoin.
You can wake up every morning and say GM.
GM. Today is Monday, and it's the 1st of July. Welcome to Q3, the third quarter of the financial year. Welcome to a new month and a new week. So Bitcoin started the month with a green impulse, as it often does. Pushed up into the bands. We got as high as the upper band, which was the limit that I mentioned. If you're looking over here, already pushed up. And actually I'll send a GM. And we will say both bands hit. Both levels hit. And that leaves BTC now. So I mentioned 63.8 and 62.6. So if we zoom in, Bitcoin pushed up as high as 63.7. Okay, so close enough. If you look at the actual bands, it touched it. And 62.6 is the lower band, which is now where we're basically going to be looking for Bitcoin to either hold or reject from. So just on this one, and then we'll go into the volume chart. So as long as BTC can hold here and form a compression, if Bitcoin's able to form a consolidation in here within these ranges, and those bands, those daily bands can compress together, that's when you can actually see a large move that would be a trend shift, and for me would actually be a sign of a back to the bull market, and probably Bitcoin beginning its rise towards new all-time high. I don't think that's the most likely outcome, mostly based upon the current structure across a bunch of charts and the time as well, July. I don't think that July necessarily has the best setup to be bullish, but it very well can be. There's a few points worth noting that people have mentioned. A lot of this obviously is past looking, but all we do is look to the past anyway. There's nothing that predicts the future. So Bitcoin does have a tendency. Where are we here? Bitcoin returns. When June is red, will July be green? So since Bitcoin's inception, or at least since 2013, red June, green July. 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 Every single time, it's only 5 times, but 2013, 2018, 2020, 21, 22, and this year. So 6 of the, 12 years measured? Yeah, 6 out of 12, so 50% of the time we have a red June, but every single time we have a red June, we have a green July. So is that going to hold? It's not statistically significant, to be clear. Right? It's not statistically significant, meaning there just are not enough data points to actually draw a strong conclusion from it. But certainly, it's something worth noting. Now, also, on average, Junes tend to be flat or down, and July actually tends to be quite good, quite decent returns. Out of the overall yearly returns, and Bitcoin is a very seasonal, cyclical asset. Like, this is one of the things where looking at your monthly returns, weekly returns, quarterly returns, all that kind of stuff, it's good as a starting point. It's helpful to try and frame a rough idea because Bitcoin has followed, basically a 4-year cycle, as we all know, around the halvings. And Bitcoin has in the past had a very clear tendency to have bullish and bearish years, specifically within the 4-year cycle. And we're obviously in the halving year, which is a bullish year. And if you look as well at the halving years, 2020, so we're going to look at post-halving. 2020 in June, we were red. 2016 in June, we were actually green. So there's a lot of talk about, and I need to double check when the 2016 halving was, just to make sure I'm right here. Because I think that was post-halving May, and then it was in July. I thought that, yep. Right. So instead of that, what we're doing is post-halving. So post-halving, so July 9th was the halving in 2016. So I want to look at July and August returns. And then May 2020, I want to look at May and June returns. Looking at the 2 months post-halving. So July and August 2016, July red, August red. See that? 2020, it was May. So we had May green, June red. So the tendency, and this, plays out well with miners, plus, the adjustments and changes that happen after the Bitcoin halving, there tends to be a period of weaker performance post-halving. Our halving this year was in April, so we've had the 2 months, May, June. We had green May, red June. So overall, I would say that obviously echoes 2020 more than it does 2016. 2016, we had just 2 straight red months, about the same magnitude. 2020, we had a green May and a red June after a early May halving. This time we had a late April halving, and we got a green May, red June. And then, of course, 2020, that led into a big green July. Now, is that going to be the same? Again, doesn't guarantee it. If you look at 2020, we had this really nice consolidation for 2 months post-halving, where Bitcoin compressed and squeezed the volatility down to almost nothing and then had a nice breakout from it. We don't have that yet. And I think Bitcoin is moving, on a different... So I think an extension of all these time frames is the most likely, right? So that's the first thing I want to say, which means if it took 2 months post-halving for Bitcoin to squeeze and build up energy here, I would say it probably will take 3 or 4 months now. It's a bigger asset, and I mean significantly bigger. Bitcoin is up 5x from here, 6x from here, 6x, about 10k to 60k, 6 times bigger. All of this has happened in the meantime. We've got we've got the ETFs, we've got all this stuff. And the bigger an asset becomes, the harder it becomes to move. And we're coming off the back of a massive trend. Like, you can't deny this was an enormous trend that came after a brutal bear market, plus a 1 year plus of a reaccumulation and a 7-month compression in between that then we broke out from. I think Bitcoin, if you're looking at it and saying, well, how long was it exactly post-halving? Because I do think we get the big post-halving move. There are still structural effects of miners selling and, the difficulty adjustment and all this kind of shit that happens after the halving. I do still think that's going to have some effect, whether it's even just psychological, that people... A lot of things, psychologically, people don't want to bid Bitcoin after the halving because it's never been a good time to buy immediately post-halving. But 2, 3, 4 months later, it is. So, people might just be creatures of habit and do that. And so the halving, before we had that breakout, that impulse candle, was 77 days, right? So now we are how far post-halving? We are currently 72 days post-halving. I don't think the structure is not here in the next 5 days for Bitcoin to have a similar move, because I think that the bands are only just getting retested. And so, if you compare that to back in 2020, right? We're only just retesting them. And over here, the bands stayed compressed, which meant that volatility was compressing. If you look at where we're at here, we're more like here. That's more like where we're at. Obviously, we haven't had a COVID collapse. But in terms of the bands, which are a representation of trends redeveloping, we're actually just testing them again for the first time. So when you look at that, you can see it here. It's probably still a couple weeks, maybe even a few weeks away, to where we'll chop around, push above, maybe drop back below, and then start to squeeze on it. And what you want to see is those bands coming together and then flipping green. And that will take, I would expect, especially if it's going to build up for a proper move, it will take probably another, maybe the rest of this month, which will put us at over 100 days, about a month longer than 2020, which I'd say at least that makes sense. Again, bigger asset, takes much longer for support to form, retests, accumulation, distribution. It's very normal to expect all of these things to move slower and take longer. The asset is getting bigger and it's also getting less volatile, which leads to more of these type of compression moves. You know, if you look at Bitcoin's volatility, there's a couple of ways you can measure it. I don't know how far this one goes back. It was back 2023. Here we go. So if you draw a line from the previous halving to this one, previous halving was here. I'll just take it from the bottom of that closed candle all the way to where we're at now. You can see down from 3 down to 1.72. Doesn't seem like much, but consider that this was Bitcoin in 2017. The trend of volatility for Bitcoin is down. And as you see, the spikes get lower and the trend is down. That makes sense, obviously, because Bitcoin is getting bigger and more accepted. So it should become less volatile, right? You pick a meme coin, that's going to be super volatile. You pick Bitcoin, it should be much less so. So we'll zoom it in and look where we're at here. We're back into this retest that I talked about on yesterday's weekly outlook. So this is the place where you would expect it to actually reject, right? The value area, we went below. This is currently a resistance area. Resistance to the value area low. And so you have to give it a few days. You know, as you can see with retests, they take time. It's not just going to be one and done, unless you obviously get a strong rejection. If Bitcoin has a strong rejection all the way back down and continues to consolidate around here, it's quite likely then that we are going to go for the lows. But first of the month, first day of the week, and we've had a pump up into the bands to retest and clear out some stops. I wouldn't read too much into that from a bullish perspective, and I wouldn't also be piling in to shorts here either from a bearish perspective. I think it's a case of let the market play out a little bit more before we do anything. Now, just like this path of the value area at the highs, where if we break out of the value area, I said it would moon. The same thing applies as a volume profile trader. The same thing applies on the downside. You break out below it, that leads to, and can lead to, lower prices. So we did break out of it over here. We broke down. We are now back in the retest phase. And it's very important to see where does price go from here on BTC. If it continues to consolidate between 58 and 63, it opens up a much greater possibility of a dip down lower. And again, you know, it's moving in the right direction, so you can't complain with how it looks at the moment, but that's where we're at currently. ETH is trying to build up through its own bands, much stronger, or not much stronger, but at least notably stronger in terms of Bitcoin, that the bands are compressing more. It's tested them now for the second time in this push. It's breaking out from the downtrend line. So obviously start of the month, and the first breakout of these trend lines can be a trap and a fake out. You might see one push lower. But if you see several more days, week or two of Bitcoin, ETH, and even Solana not breaking down or not showing rejection, that's a good sign. Solana, if things stay the way they are, is going to be the first one to flip its bands back to green, which is good. And then if you're looking for your second confirmation on all of these, it's very simple. Get above the 50 EMA and the 1221 bands. Get above the 50 and the bands, which Ethereum's trying to do, and consolidate above there and push away. And same with Bitcoin. Bitcoin obviously below it, much more below it, and will take longer, which is not something you want to see. You want to see Bitcoin leading. At every point in this bull market, we've had Bitcoin leading, but which again tells me that you might see some outperformance from ETH and Solana in the near term. Bitcoin, though, is lagging it and probably holds the market back. And that July, I think we can see some green, but it might just be a rally rather than a bottom, right? It might be just a rally up before a push back. Like, how would that look? I'll get 3 of them side by side. It'd be something like this to me. Just get fresh charts. Bitcoin, ETH, And then we'll look at Sol. Right. So, if you're looking at these moves, the outperformance, and you look at the three of them side by side, you can obviously see that Solana and Bitcoin are more similar. Bitcoin's stronger, right? It had a stronger rally up and it's holding its higher low, but they're pretty much the same. Ethereum obviously significantly stronger with this higher low, hasn't retested its range lows, hasn't dropped back down there yet because of ETF and all that. So Ethereum has the strongest setup in the near term, and I think if Bitcoin goes into a bullish consolidation and a bullish reaccumulation, which would mean a push up and then some kind of compression here, like we mentioned, and then a breakout later on. Oh, I've messed this up. Here we go. If Bitcoin does something like that, you probably see ETH and Sol rally much harder initially. So on that push where Bitcoin moves up to 66 or whatever, you might see ETH going all the way up near the highs, but then of course rejecting back, and then Bitcoin taking back over before Ethereum finally runs. Same as Solana. Because they're lower cap, they're higher beta, they can move much easier, and Solana could even move towards the highs, but drop all the way back. It will have a bigger drop if it has a bigger rally. And you might see that forming for all of them. So Bitcoin, I mean, it's really simple for me. For the next big leg of the bull, Bitcoin needs to lead, regardless. If you're going to have a proper new bull leg and all-time high 100k, big altcoin rallies, meme coins again, it's going to have to be led by Bitcoin, and it's currently not being led by Bitcoin. So don't forget that these are just rallies. These are bounces. Until proven otherwise, these are just bounces. They're not bullish. The structure's not bullish on Bitcoin. And the fact that Ethereum is leading, or is at least stronger, again, is not a sign that has ever been healthy for the market. It's always been something that has led to a later stage rally before some kind of correction. And since we're not super late in like a 4-year cycle theory, 4-year cycle view, like we're still very early, we're in the halving year. And indications would be there's probably 12 to 18 months of bull market left. If you go off past bulls, right? Past doesn't predict the future. But if that's the case, then this Bitcoin underperformance mid-cycle seems like probably more of a temporary thing for a couple of months before we then have some kind of correction, pull back, and Bitcoin takes over again. The alternative to that is that Bitcoin's already done, and then we're going into the last push. Ethereum outperforms, and then the bull's over. So I don't think that's the case. At least there's not much pointing towards that at the moment. But, you know, for the industry as a whole, Bitcoin going higher significantly, especially with, you know, government more money printing and all that kind of shit. That's the thing that will give crypto its biggest waves, because Bitcoin is the biggest, Bitcoin has the biggest wealth effect, and that always translates more into the bigger moves. So yeah, that's something that I'm keeping a close eye on. And as we start the month, I would say I lean bearish, obviously, because the structure's bearish. It's retesting the bands, and generally when something pushes up into the bands for the first time, it goes to new lows. Right? So there's pushing up into the bands for the first time after breaking them, pushed into the bands here for the first time after breaking them, right? So didn't touch them. I mean, the upper band, I should say. Pushed up, went to new lows, right? Pushed up, touched the upper band, went to new lows. So it's not impossible for that to get invalidated. That can happen, right? We can absolutely see something more like what we did over here, which is push straight back through them. Of course, that was also reclaiming the 50 EMA, and that was a much shorter correction. But your first rally into those bands, be mindful of it, pushing up, coming back down, at least to range lows or to new lows, as I think we're still in a shorter term traders market, and I think that rotations are going to still be quicker, and there might not be a lot of underlying demand there for Bitcoin to continue to strengthen and push higher, because we still have weak ETF flows as of right now. We still have the potential for government selling with Germany, America. We still have the Mt. Gox flows coming, all of that. And all of those things are going to be priced in to a certain extent. But they are real. It's real selling that's potential. And the thing with, especially with the ETFs as you look at them now, there isn't real strong demand yet. We don't see a clear, strong source of demand. So that's the thing that is the most notable. And I think that seasonally, while we can have a good July, and hopefully we do, seasonally the best strength in Bitcoin comes through the end of Q3 into Q4. So we're talking September, October, November, December. That tends to be Bitcoin's strongest phase of the year, part of the year. And so we might just be a few weeks away from catching that. Now, if that is going to play out, it might get front ran. So, that's the whole basis and the whole nature of markets. If you think that September is going to be bullish, you should get long in July and August, right? You want to get long before everybody else comes in to buy. So that's something I'm watching for as well, that things might get pushed forward slightly, especially if everyone's anticipating a bullish Q4. We might get a bullish Q3, bigger Q3. So anyway, that's that. GM. See you later on the live stream. I'm going to cover the challenge accepted results as well as Ask Michael GM.